The History of Castlebar podcast is sponsored by mayobooks.ie.
Hello and welcome to the History of Castlebar podcast. I'm Noel Campbell.
And I'm John Healy.
Each week we'll be discussing a selected chapter from our book, The History of Castlebar, which is available online from mayobooks.ie or in-store in the Castle Bookshop. This week we'll be discussing a chapter that John has penned, and it's A Music Town. John, A Music Town, it's a broad chapter, I suppose.
It is, and very much so, Noel, A Music Town, because, everything from orchestras to show bands to musicals, operas, pantomimes, choral societies, Castlebar covered the whole gamut of musical activity and musical entertainment. And that's going back to, we'll say, the early 1900s, I suppose, when the first regimental bands, well, not the first, but the regimental bands would parade through the streets of the town from the military barracks. And they would have been a standard part of the entertainment locally as well. And it was an ex-British Army bandsman, a man called Mullins, who lived on the Westport Road, who formed the first ever Castlebar brass band. He was an accomplished bandmaster and achieved a very high standard, apparently. It went on to be called the Temperance Band. Now, I don't know whether that was a misnomer or not, because the word has it that some of the members were partial to a drop of alcohol. Yeah. So I don't know whether temperance was just a nod to the temperance movement or not.
Okay. Yeah.
And in fact, jocosely down the years, it was sometimes referred to as the Porter Band. So maybe that shows that temperance wasn't exactly there.
Might have secured funding for them or something, you never know. Yeah.
They might have secured funding from them, is right. The Temperance Band went on for many, many years, and eventually it fizzled out. Immigration took its toll and that. But there was always the sort of a nucleus of a band or a brass band in the town. Even in 1936, when the All-Ireland team came, the musicians assembled to play them down from the railway station. And then every year at the Eucharistic procession, again, they would assemble kind of out of nowhere, and you'd have a band to lead the Eucharistic procession around the town. So there was always that tradition of music bands and marching bands. And then, of course, you come along to the present Castlebar Brass Band. And from 1964 to 79, we had St. Joseph's Silver Band. And that was a very successful band as well. Again, that fizzled out, but was reformed. And to the extent that in 2012, you had the Castlebar Band playing in New York at the St. Patrick's Day Parade and playing in Gaelic Park. I think Mayo were playing that weekend as well in Gaelic Park. So, it has been continuous.
And as you said, there was always kind of the town could always count on a core group of musicians I suppose at a time when instruments probably weren't cheap, and certainly they were a luxury maybe at the time. It's kind of it's a compliment to the town that they could always call on groups to come together.
Yeah, well, quite a number of them would be attached to particularly the Stephen Garvey band, you see. So there would be musicians who were members of the band and who would turn out for these kind of special occasions, as well as fulfilling their duties to Stephen as.
Tell me a bit about Stephen. I mean, it's a name that comes up time and time again, but I admit he's someone I know very little about.
Yeah, he was. Stephen was legendary character. He was born in Castle Street in 1902. And he was a bit of a child prodigy, even as musical prodigy, even then, And by the time he was 20, in 1922, he had produced a pantomime in the town hall, Little Red Riding Hood, the proceeds of which went to the local battalion of the IRA. So that gives you an idea where Stephen's sympathy lay. That was 1922. But by 1926, he would be only 24 years of age at that stage. He was leading his own orchestra. He was performing in Galway, in Bailey's Ballroom, where the programme went out on 2RN. I think it was Radio Éireann, the forerunner of Radio Éireann. But his band performed there, and he was only, as I said, 24 years of age then, So he was an all-rounder. He was choir master, he was the organist in the church, he was a composer, he was a lyricist, he was a producer of operas and pantomimes and musicals. A general all-rounder, and as well as being, of course, the leading orchestra of his day, I'd say. He was internationally recognised, played in New York, visited America, wowed them in America, So yeah, he was the torchbearer for music.
Was the family synonymous with music, the Garvey family in Castle Street. Castle Street seems to be a bit of a hotbed of music, was it?
It was, yeah. Castle Street was sort of renowned for its musical talent. Not particularly, no. I don't know where Stephen would have picked up his... He did come under the wing of a Dean Jackson, who was the Protestant minister in town, and he was a man very devoted to musical accomplishment, trained a lot of singers for Feis Ceol and trained musicians and that sort of thing. So I'd say Stephen probably got his early lessons in piano and music from Dean Jackson. In 1953, he was invited to America. He kind of liked America, came home again, played again with the orchestra for another maybe 3 years, and then retired permanently to Houston in Texas, where his sister Mercedes Garvey, was a member of the Divine Word Order in Houston, and died a young man. He retired, went to Houston in 1956 and died in 1962. He was only 60 years of age and was buried in Houston. Now, come 1978, the UDC, after a lot of discussion, put a plaque on his birthplace in Castle Street. And that prompted a lot of interest again in Stephen and a lot of people who knew him over the years. And they figured that maybe his remains should be repatriated. So a committee was formed in 1995, the Friends of Stephen Garvey, and it was very successful. It raised a lot of money, and he was brought back and reinterred in the Garvey plot in the cemetery here in Castlebar. And of course you have the Stephen Garvey Way called after him.
Stephen Garvey Way as well, along the Ring Road as well.
Also called that as well, But yeah, he had a brother, Jimmy Garvey, who, after Stephen left to America, Jimmy took up the role of producer of pantomimes. He died a young man as well, but very successful too,
And the pantomimes were quite
big
events.
Oh yeah, they were huge events.
And as you mentioned, Stephen Garvey and Andy McTighe and a few others.
That's
were
correct.
Well known as how do we call them? Organisers and orchestrators, maybe.
They were.
That sounds a bit clandestine, but organisers. Yeah. The pantomime, I mean, was it a Christmas event? Was it an annual event?
It was an annual Christmas event, and the funds went to the Vincent de Paul Society. So that was the big, I'd say it was their big fundraiser for them, highly successful. It was run for a week and, draw audiences from all over. I remember we had a small shop across from the town hall. I remember as a young fella, people coming from Castlerea and Roscommon and buying sweets and boxes of chocolate before they go into the...
coming from that far out?
They were coming from that far out, yeah.
I thought it was well regarded, I presume.
Very, very highly regarded, yeah. Very, very, very highly thought of. And kind of caught the imagination of the town, You had... Everybody was involved in the panto. There wasn't much else maybe to do
probably
in the 50s. So everybody was involved in the pantos. Yeah, it was great.
I remember reading a list of names involved in one of them, and it's kind of striking, as you mentioned. Everyone took part in it, from the professionals and the everyone was involved.
That's true.
It was solicitors were acting, and
they were. It was across the board.
Yeah.
Teachers and doctors and solicitors and everything.
Everyone bought into it.
Everyone, yeah. You mentioned there in Old Castle Street, and I suppose, or Castle Lane as it was known back in the day, and it was synonymous really with music. You had a whole series of people and performers who lived in Castle Street, apart from Stephen, Stephen being the outstanding figure. But at the very end of Castle Street, the last house on the left, kind of under the convent wall, if you like, there was a house there, and a man called Daddy Welch. I don't know what his real name was. He was known as Daddy Welch. And Daddy gave dancing lessons, Irish dancing and ballroom dancing. And people would go along there before they'd go to the proper dances in the town hall. And Daddy would, teach them the old-time waltz and the quick step and that.
Prepare them.
Extraordinary, And then right beside him on the town side, there was a lady called Madam Burke. She was Mary Burke as her name, but she was always called Madam Burke. Madam had her own orchestra as well, and highly successful. She was a tremendous pianist and accordionist. She had her own orchestra. She played in dance halls and that, but she'd also played in Ashford Castle for society functions, the Galway Blazers Ball or the Hunt Ball or that type of thing. And again, she was very successful. Her band went on from, right through the 50s, I'd say, 40s and 50s. And then she retired and she devoted her time to teaching music. After that, she became the resident pianist in The Traveller's Friend. So every weekend she played as resident pianist in The Traveller's Friend. And yet she turned out and maybe play with Stephen if he was stuck for a pianist. So she was across the road. All he had to do was, are you free for such an engagement tonight? And that was it. And she'd be at it. Beside her, you had, there was a man called Christy Hoban, father of John Hoban, the present singer and musician and troubadour. Stephen had a grocery shop and he was a tremendous singer. The Carney brothers, Carney family indeed, Dr. Paul Carney's father, Piers, his uncle Jojo, his aunt was Rosemary, and she was a music teacher in St. Joseph's Secondary School. Okay. And she was the mainstay of Stephen Garvey's operas. You know, she really was the combining force of the whole thing, getting the orchestra together, getting the choreography going and so on, you know. And then you had the Collins music shop. Tommy's grandfather, John J. Collins. He was, he was a multi-talented man, as you know. He was a politician and he was a publisher and he was a journalist and he was a newspaper owner. But he was a musician. The piccolo was his particular instrument. But he was recorded to play on RTE, or 2RN as it was then, on St. Patrick's Day. Every year he'd give a performance and a recital. And his son, Kevin, who would be Tommy Collins' uncle, he was a violinist and he played as well on 2RN. And they were signed up by Parlophone. Parlophone was a well-known record company at the time. You had Parlophone and Decca and various labels like that. And the Collinses were signed up by Parlophone to produce a series of traditional Irish music. They also had a recording studio, I think I mentioned that in the book. They had a recording studio in the music shop. So you'd come in and you'd record a message for your family overseas or for your relations in America and that type of thing. And they recorded there and sent it off to America to be played. Yeah. And if you were, let's say if you were a budding musician and fancied yourself, you could go in and be recorded in Collins's and then send off your credentials to whatever music publisher might be interested in what you're. So they were very, very forward thinking, the Collins family at the time, you know. But all that happened, as I say, in Castle Lane.
Quite a small street.
Quite a small street. Yeah,
it's phenomenal.
But I think John Hoban has a song called Castle Lane where he records a lot of that in his own growing up, you know.
I think that's available on YouTube.
So it is,
yeah, it's phenomenal for a small street to have such
a small street, yeah.
And we're not talking just standing up in the pub having a tune. We're talking about
you're talking about the real, absolutely, yeah, high quality stuff, you know. You know, you had a lot of that, and then you had the song contest, of course, came in after that, and that was kind of took over.
When did the song contest? When was it mooted that this was going to be a runner, or who was involved even? Or where would the idea have come from?
The idea came from a songwriter from Northern Ireland, a Mrs. Hall, who was friendly with Michael Joe Egan, the solicitor, and she suggested to Michael Joe that maybe a song, you know, about Castlebar could do wonders. You know, like Lovely Leitrim was out at the time, and that was boosting Leitrim, and you had Galway Bay. And she suggested a song for Castlebar. And Michael Joe Egan thought, yeah, that was a good idea. So he brought it to the Chamber of Commerce and they looked at it and they thought, yeah, why not? Give it a go. So the first song contest, it was only a one-night affair in 1966. It was in October. And anyway, they got a bit of momentum going, and Paddy Jennings agreed to put up a substantial cash prize for the winner. Jerry MacDonald, who was the band manager in the Royal Ballroom, put the finger on a lot of bands because they were free on Monday night to say to come along and perform. The contest would be the centre point of the concert, and Gay Byrne was engaged. And of course, he was a big, big name. He was engaged to run the show and to be compere. So I remember I was there that particular first night, and, you know, the crowds were hanging from the ceilings, as they say. You know, you couldn't get in the door. It was a big, big night. The whole thing went on till about 2:00 in the morning because you had fellas coming on and then to take their gear away, and then more fellas would come on with gear and so on. But they had 70 entries for new songs for the competition. That was whittled down to 15. So the 15 songs had to be performed, as well as the peripheral entertainment as well, you know?
Yeah.
So they picked a winner, and the song was played on the Late Late Show. The performers were put on the Late Late Show the following Friday night, which was a great boost, you know.
Was it? Did it go out live? The Castlebar show?
Not at that stage. Not at that stage. Later on, then, when the Chamber of Commerce saw how successful this was, they decided we'll make a week-long song contest out of it. So it ran from Monday to Friday, and on Monday night you might have country and western, and on Tuesday you might have folk music, and on Wednesday night there'd be something else. And each night there'd be, I think it was 3 qualifiers from the early nights. And then on Friday was the big.
What was attendance like midweek? I mean, that's a big ask. Monday
it was good.
Monday through
It
to
was
Friday.
surprisingly good.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And the calibre of acts as well. Still.
The calibre
still
of acts
held.
was very good. Oh, yeah. You see, at the time, RTE weren't interested in amateur songwriters, for want of a better word, of which there were hundreds, and some of them very good throughout the country. So Castlebar was the ideal place for them to test themselves out, you know. I mean, it grew and grew and grew. You'd start with Gay Byrne, you had Mike Murphy, Terry Wogan flew in from London, Akron Bilk flew in from England to perform. You had all, you know, Dana, who was the Eurovision winner around that time, she was one of the stars. You had the top names at the thing. Then the RTE Concert Orchestra were taken on board, and they'd arrive down in Castlebar, spend a week, and they'd perform. It was recorded then for transmission on the Saturday night. That was the original idea. But after about 2 or 3 years, RTE decided they'd send it out live. So it was transmitted live on a Friday night. Topped the TAM ratings. It was the biggest thing they had on RTE.
So from its initial one night beginning, how long till it was a live? It was being presented live on Saturday nights, which was probably the last night of the event.
The last night of the concert. Yeah,
not too long after, maybe, was it?
Not too long after, in the 1980s, I think. Yeah. It was.
So who would, I mean, to get say Gay Byrne, as you said, the biggest name.
Biggest name.
Who would? I mean, you mentioned Paddy Jennings. Any other names that were obviously working hard to deliver these?
Well, the Chamber of Commerce worked very hard. You know, John McHale was the editor of the Connacht Telegraph, and he was director of the Song Contest, and he had huge network of contacts with the media in Dublin. And they'd invite down the social diarists from the papers as adjudicators. So, of course, that immediately guaranteed
paper space.
Huge coverage. And they were lucky insofar as, for example, the Director General of RTE was a man called George Waters. George was from Ballina. He was an engineer by profession, but he was a first cousin of Tom Correll, who was the subsequent editor of the Connacht Telegraph. And that helped to open a few doors as well. So, you know, when it came to a bit of leverage with RTE and a bit of leverage with the national papers, they had all the contacts. Their main problem, and I think what probably sounded the death knell in the end, was that they couldn't get promise of continuity from RTE every year. Every year they had to go back to RTE and plead with them to put out the programme. So 6 months of the year was taken up with going up and down to RTE and asking would they do the Friday night. And then you went out to look for a sponsor, and the stage time was running short. Whereas if they could have got a commitment from RTE, say a 5-year commitment, then, you know, sponsorship would have been that much easier to get, and backers and so on.
And was that did that lead to its eventual
it did
decline?
Really. It did, I think, yeah. By 1988, RTE were saying, oh, we have transmission difficulties, and, you know, we won't do it anymore, and you owe us money for the orchestra not being paid when they were down in Castlebar, which was a bone of contention. And the Castlebar people saying, no, that was never the plan. You were always supposed to come free of charge to this thing. But, you know, in the end, what happened was RTE pulled the plug. The Guinness and Gallagher Cigarettes, who were the main sponsors, said they weren't interested anymore. Right. And I think that really put the, you know, and maybe it had lived its 22 years, maybe it had lived its life at that stage.
Quite a long time to.
It was a long time.
And well done for getting that much out of it.
Oh, it was a huge success. Huge success.
Well, John, thanks very much. I won't ask you to sing us out, but thanks very much for a good look back at a very musical town, and I think we still have that today as well, which is great. So maybe, you know, in another few decades, somebody will be adding another chapter.
Exactly,
to the music history
and another chapter.
Thank you, John. Thanks.
Indeed, thanks, Noel.
Before we go to an ad break, we'll take our usual look back at an ad from the past. And John, I think you have an ad from the Connacht Telegraph from the early 50s.
I have indeed, Noel. I picked out this one from the 3rd of May 1952, and it must have been a time when hygiene was a major issue in the country, because it's quite a big ad, and the heading on it is, "Are those hands clean?" with a picture of somebody seemingly buttered in a slice of bread. I think that's what it looks like to me. But the dialogue reads, "Your hands can be a danger, not only to yourself, but to those you love. They touch dirt and so gather germs. So always, before you touch food, make it a rule to wash the hands thoroughly with soap and water. Remember always that there is danger in dirt, but cleanliness means safety." And the strapline at the bottom, "There is danger in dirt." And it was issued by the Women's National Health Association of Ireland, Inc., an association I never heard of before or since. Does that ring any bell with you?
No, not in the slightest. But as you were reading it, I was expecting it to end with the health department.
Yeah, that's right. Department of Health, yeah.
Which were doing big ads at the time about unpasteurised milk, and
that's right.
Don't be buying door to door because it's.
They were. That's right. Be careful of your
in trouble.
So the Women's National Health Association of Ireland, Inc., which nearly gives it an American flavour, you know.
Yeah. Possibly linked to the soap that they were selling or something. You wouldn't know. Yeah.
Maybe so. But that was the one I picked out for this week.
Brendan Gilmartin Video and Photography, New Antrim Street, Castlebar. With state-of-the-art equipment and a keen eye for detail, we bring your vision to life. From corporate events to family portraits, we ensure every shot is stunning and memorable. Call now at 087 746 0121 to schedule your consultation. Brendan Gilmartin Video and Photography, New Antrim Street, Castlebar.
As always, we'd like to invite our listeners to submit any comments or questions you might have, and you can do that by emailing historyofcastlebar@gmail.com, and myself and John will do our best to answer them and get back to you with some replies as well. We have a question in here from Phelim, and Phelim asks a question about the Castlebar Castle, John.
Yes.
And where exactly was the castle?
Yeah.
And does it still exist?
Yeah, it's a question that's often asked, because most people that come to Castlebar say, well, where's this castle that it's called after? I know that there is a misconception that the castle is the one up near on the shore of Lough Lenny.
Yes, that comes up a lot.
That comes up a lot. And a lot of local people are of the impression that is Barry's castle, but I think we can safely say that that's not the case.
No, that's an unfinished Burke.
A Burke castle.
More a fortified house than anything, but it was a dwelling that was never finished. But you can see why people would believe that. It's
because it's the only thing you can see.
It's the only thing you can see.
A castle.
Yeah. No, unfortunately, there's no remains of the castle overground anymore. The castle was on the grounds, as we know, up on the military barracks site. There as you're heading to Springfield. It makes sense it was on that site. It was elevated. It's beside the river. Before the river, of course, was controlled with the walls it's under now, almost canalled. But it went through, since it was built in 1235 was the date that associated with the building of that castle. It went through many hands over the centuries, and the first name that we can definitely identify as being associated with the castle is in 1333, and it was the de Coogan family. And from that then it obviously went up through, we have English involvement in Ireland, and it goes through Bingham hands and Burke hands and Bingham hands and Burke hands, and there's a lot of to and fro, but it's always on that site where the castle is. On them, if anyone's familiar with the military barracks grounds, it'd be where the green area is around the parading ground. So there's a green area to the side of the parading ground, and that's where. So later on, actually, in when we have a lot more people, historians or chroniclers writing about Castlebar and the histories of the town. We know from the Strafford Inquisition of County Mayo, which was in the mid-1630s, that there was a manor, castle and town of lands of Castlebar. So it was quite, if once it's mentioned, you can take it that it's a inhabited, operating castle.
Right.
So it's well known that the castle was following Anglo-Norman design as well, would have had two main towers. If anyone's familiar with Ballylahan Castle on the way out to Stray there, if you're heading to Foxford.
Yes. Yeah. So it resembled
that a lot. So if you want to get a feel for what the castle would look like, it would have looked like that. Two towers at the front and a surrounding wall around it. And inside that then you would have had other buildings as well. And they might have been wooden, and as time went on they became stone as well. Yeah, the description of it is that it was quite a large complex, if you want to call it that, at the time. Eventually, up to the 1820s, before it was demolished, the towers itself housed British soldiers. Now, the towers themselves wouldn't have been quite, the diameter of the towers was not something that you'd immediately associate with billeting soldiers in it. Like I think it was quite small. If I'm not mistaken, it was only a matter of meters across. So that's something I can never get my head around, is how did they actually fit so many soldiers in there at the time. But the castle then, once there was plans for the substantial military barracks we have up there now, they demolished the remainder of the old castle up there. And thankfully to the county council and their archaeology team up there, we know now that there are remains of the castle, the original castle, under the turf. And hopefully someday, you know, we can maybe get trial trenches dug up there to actually see these remains and confirm once and for all. But that's...
So we know the footprint.
We know the footprint, but unfortunately no castle left over ground today.
And was it there not until the 1820s? Is that what you said?
The 1820s, it would have housed... It was recorded as housing infantry.
Yeah. And it was demolished.
In the two towers. The brickwork then from it was used, they reckon, to help build the infantry barracks up there now.
Oh, yes.
As you do. You would keep reusing the stone.
And nothing left over ground?
Nothing left over ground, only on maps. Well, John, it's good enough to end this particular podcast. I want to thank the listeners and invite everyone again to join us next week. Just a quick reminder that the book, The History of Castlebar, can be bought online at mayobooks.ie or in store at the Castle Bookshop. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. From myself, Noel, goodbye.
And from me, John Healy, thanks very much.
The History of Castlebar podcast is sponsored by mayobooks.ie. The series is produced by me, Brendan Gilmartin. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend and leave a review.